I spent basically the whole weekend poring over the timeline for this deep dive.
Yeah.
And honestly,
That's a lot.
it is. The sheer scale of the information we're tackling today is, it's almost hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, the velocity of the data coming out of the region right now is staggering.
Truly. And just to set the stage for you, it is Monday, March 2, 2026.
Right.
And the world is currently navigating a chaotic, massive, and an entirely multi-front military conflict involving the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
We are seeing a real-time fusion of military briefings, raw satellite imagery, global economic shockwaves.
And just ground-level chaos.
Exactly. It's coming from every possible vector.
And to help us actually structure that chaos, we are relying on a highly detailed source today. It's a comprehensive chronological breakdown and strategic analysis compiled on a blog titled Barakface.
Which is an incredibly thorough compilation.
It really is. This source hasn't just aggregated news clips. It has meticulously gathered verified tactical reports, intricate timelines, global economic impact assessments, and
even deeply researched speculative scenarios regarding the ongoing operations.
right. For some operational context, the U.S. military has dubbed its campaign Operation Epic Fury.
While Israel's coordinated effort is operating under the name Roaring Lion.
Yeah.
What makes this compilation so valuable is how it takes a deeply fragmented, overwhelming news cycle and maps out the actual anatomy of the conflict.
You can really see the connective tissue.
Exactly. You can see the connective tissue between a cyber attack in Tel Aviv and an airstrike in Tehran.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are taking this mountain of raw data and turning it into actionable understanding for you.
Right.
We are going to map out exactly what is happening on the ground, in the air, and in cyberspace.
We're unpacking the strategic objectives driving these massive military movements.
And crucially, we're going to look at the cascading global implications that are already hitting financial markets worldwide.
But before we dive into the timeline, it is absolutely vital that we establish the framework for our discussion today.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yes. The source material we are examining from this blog contains highly politically charged content.
Very charged.
It details aggressive geopolitical strategies and includes very strong viewpoints.
Including direct statements from political figures like Donald Trump and Marco Rubio.
Exactly. As well as distinct arguments explicitly advocating for regime change in Iran.
So we need to be unequivocally clear with you. We are not taking sides.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the military actions, or the political goals of any party mentioned.
Not at all.
Our sole job today is to impartially report and unpack the ideas, data, and claims contained strictly within this source material.
So you can understand the radically different perspectives and strategies at play.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
According to the timeline in our source, the kinetic strikes initiated in the very early hours of February 28, 2026.
Specifically, 1:15 a.m. Eastern Time.
Right. We are talking about an overwhelming wave of nearly 900 U.S. and Israeli airstrikes across Iran in a single wave. This wasn't a gradual tit-for-tat escalation. This was a massive decapitation strike right out of the gate.
Yeah.
The reports detail that key leadership meetings in Tehran were actively targeted.
Resulting in the deaths of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei,
Defense Minister Amir Nasirzadeh,
IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour,
and at least 5 other senior military officials, all within the first few hours.
When you coordinate 900 simultaneous airstrikes, you aren't just sending a message.
No.
You are attempting to induce systemic shock.
Right.
A decapitation strike of that magnitude is designed to instantly sever the central nervous system of a nation's military and political apparatus.
It's total paralysis.
Taking out the supreme leader and the absolute top brass of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, in the middle of the night, creates immediate cascading strategic paralysis.
Because the units on the ground suddenly have no central command to report to.
Exactly. But the coalition didn't stop at leadership.
Right. The strikes simultaneously hit primary air defense systems
Ballistic missile launch sites.
and major IRGC naval bases.
The source specifically notes the base in Konarak, where massive storage bunkers and naval vessels were obliterated before they could even deploy.
And then there are nuclear sites.
Right.
The text specifically highlights strikes on the facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan.
Yes.
But the source uses a very specific, almost counterintuitive phrase when assessing the damage.
It does.
It says the uranium enrichment capabilities were significantly hindered, but ultimately set back by months, not years.
Right.
Months, not years.
If the U.S. and Israel are dropping 30,000-pound bunker busters on these sites, how is a nuclear program only set back by a few months?
It's a crazy concept.
What exactly is surviving a strike of that magnitude?
It's a brilliant question, and it speaks to the limits of pure kinetic force.
Okay.
These specific nuclear sites, particularly Fordo, aren't just buildings on a military base.
Right, they're underground. They are subterranean fortresses, carved deep into the bedrock of mountains, heavily reinforced with specialized concrete, meant to withstand direct nuclear hits.
Wow.
Even with the absolute most advanced penetrator munitions in the U.S. and Israeli arsenals, completely eradicating a program so deeply entrenched is nearly impossible from the air alone.
So you can hit the surface.
You can destroy the surface infrastructure, collapse the ventilation shafts, and completely wipe out their immediate operational capacity.
But the core.
The core scientific knowledge, the centrifuges buried at the absolute lowest depths, those likely survive.
That makes sense.
Months, not years, is a sober military assessment acknowledging that this massive bombing campaign buys the coalition time, but it fundamentally does not permanently erase the nuclear equation.
But Iran didn't just absorb the blow. The response was almost immediate.
Within hours.
Yeah, they fired an estimated 150 to 200 ballistic missiles and drones at Israel.
And the source notes that while Israel's defense grid intercepted the vast majority, there were tragic, undeniable impacts.
Right, in places like Beersheba and Beit Shemesh, where a mother and daughter were killed.
Tragic.
But the retaliation wasn't limited to Israel, and this is where the map just explodes.
It really does.
Iran launched 140 projectiles at the United Arab Emirates.
Specifically targeting luxury hotels in Dubai.
They fired 63 at Qatar, hitting the Al Udeid Air Base,
They also struck U.S. bases in Bahrain.
which hosts the 5th Fleet headquarters.
Exactly. And the Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait.
What's fascinating here is how quickly the conflict widened geographically.
Right.
The geographic widening of this conflict in a matter of hours is the textbook definition of asymmetric warfare.
It's totally asymmetric.
Iran's doctrine has long held that if they are attacked, the entire region burns.
By actively targeting the UAE and Qatar, they are signaling that any nation hosting U.S. forces
Or even just cooperating with the coalition's airspace requirements.
is a legitimate active target.
This instantly transforms a bilateral conflict into a full-scale regional war. I want to focus on that detail about the luxury hotels in Dubai for a second.
Yeah.
That is a highly specific, very deliberate target.
Think about the psychological and macroeconomic impact of that choice.
Right. Dubai's brand is safety.
Dubai's entire economic model is built on the illusion of absolute safety and stability.
It's a global hub for foreign capital, tourism, and expatriate business.
When ballistic missiles start impacting luxury hotels, that illusion shatters instantly.
The capital flight is immediate.
Foreign investors freeze assets, multinational corporations pull their staff out.
And the ripple effects of this regional destabilization are already visible. The source notes hundreds of Iranians are actively fleeing as refugees across the northern borders into Turkey and Azerbaijan.
We even have a report of an Iranian strike causing an explosion at a British military base in Cyprus.
Cyprus.
The blast radius, both literal and geopolitical, expanded across multiple continents on day one.
It's wild. Moving into March 1st, the second day of the campaign, the military reality in the skies fundamentally shifted.
Right.
The source states that U.S. and Israeli forces achieved air superiority over Tehran by midday.
By midday.
And this is where the coalition's tactics changed dramatically. They transitioned from using standoff weapons to deploying stand-in munitions directly over targets in the capital.
Yes.
Now, for the coalition to be dropping gravity bombs directly over a heavily fortified capital city on day 2 means Iran's air defense network wasn't just degraded.
It must have been essentially erased overnight.
Exactly. When you look at the strategic shift from standoff to stand-in munitions, you are looking at the death of an air defense grid.
Because in the opening hours, you rely on standoff weapons.
Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from ships hundreds of miles away in the Persian Gulf.
You do that because the enemy's surface-to-air missiles are fully active, and sending a pilot into that airspace is a death sentence.
But achieving air superiority means the coalition systematically hunted down and blinded those radar networks.
The source notes that 70 to 80% of Iran's entire national air defense was neutralized in 36 hours.
80%.
Once you cross that operational threshold, stealth fighters like the F-35s can loiter directly over the capital city, virtually unchallenged.
Which completely changes the volume of fire you can bring down.
It increases it exponentially.
Yeah.
Stand-in munitions are essentially smart bombs dropped straight down onto the target from aircraft hovering right above,
On March 1 alone, they struck over 2,000 targets.
systematically dismantling command and control hubs,
The besieged militia headquarters in Tehran,
major police stations.
and any remaining surface missile stockpiles.
But hovering over a city and dropping that volume of ordnance brings the grim reality of urban warfare to the forefront.
It really does.
The source explicitly mentions the tragic collateral damage, such as the Gandhi Hotel Hospital in Tehran taking a hit.
When you are dropping high explosive munitions directly into a densely populated metropolis of over 8 million people,
Even with the most advanced precision guidance in the world, the civilian toll is inevitable and devastating.
and the chaos of this operational tempo isn't limited to the ground. By March 2, the source highlights a deeply tragic, friendly fire incident.
Yes.
Kuwaiti air defenses mistakenly locked onto and shot down 3 U.S. F-15 fighter jets.
It's a brutal, sobering reminder of the reality of modern combat.
3 jets.
We talk endlessly about AI precision and advanced stealth technology, but the fog of war is absolute.
You have to visualize the airspace.
Hundreds of coalition aircraft.
Thousands of incoming Iranian missiles and drones.
Massive, blinding electronic jamming across the entire spectrum.
And panicked, exhausted air defense operators all reacting in fractions of a second.
In that hyper-saturated environment, misidentification happens.
It proves that even for a technologically supreme coalition, sustained high-tempo operations carry immense, unpredictable friction.
Absolutely.
But none of those 900 airstrikes and none of those F-35s hovering over Tehran happen if the airspace isn't prepped first.
Which brings us to the invisible front of this war.
Cyber and electronic dominance. According to the text, just before the first kinetic strikes hit, Israel launched what the Jerusalem Post categorized as the largest cyber attack in history.
Dropping Iran's total internet connectivity down to just 4% of normal levels.
4%.
This is the modern prelude to kinetic war.
You do not send in the bombers until you have completely blinded the enemy.
Reducing a nation-state's internet connectivity to 4% means you have effectively paralyzed their entire modern infrastructure.
The symbiotic relationship between electronic warfare and kinetic warfare is absolute.
It is.
The source gives some fascinating, very specific examples of how they executed this.
It wasn't just about taking down military comms.
No, they hacked a widely used domestic religious prayer app, completely disrupting user access.
They defaced or outright took offline the primary state news agencies, IRNA and ISNA.
And fundamentally, they used aggressive electronic warfare to jam Iranian early warning radars and sensors.
The radar jamming is the pure tactical enabler.
That is what allowed the Israeli F-35s and the waves of single-use drones to slip into Iranian airspace completely undetected.
To execute that initial 1:15 a.m. decapitation strike.
But taking down the prayer app and the state news agencies,
That is pure cognitive warfare.
it is designed to maximize public confusion.
To prevent the regime from broadcasting a coherent narrative or emergency instructions to its citizens.
And instill a profound sense of isolation and vulnerability from the very first moment.
Think about it. When you wake up, your state media is offline, and your daily prayer app is hacked by a foreign military. You realize instantly that your government has lost sovereignty over the digital realm.
But the source makes it clear that Iran is not a passive victim in cyberspace.
Not at all.
They rank them as the 3rd or 4th most capable nation globally in this arena.
While the preemptive Israeli blackout severely delayed their initial response, the text details how Iran immediately began activating what it calls sleeper ransomware cells.
And Advanced Persistent Threat, or APT, groups for global retaliation,
They are actively targeting U.S. critical infrastructure
causing localized power grid failures in secondary NATO countries.
and launching massive distributed denial of service, or DDoS, attacks against major Israeli financial systems.
This is the terrifying peril of asymmetric cyber warfare.
Iran doesn't need to be able to shoot down an F-35 over Tehran to inflict catastrophic damage.
Right. They have the capability to encrypt the servers of a major hospital network in the American Midwest.
Or digitally sever the financial clearinghouses in Tel Aviv.
The text explicitly notes that these sleeper cells are pre-positioned.
These APT groups have likely been sitting dormant inside Western power grids and financial networks for years,
Mapping the architecture.
just waiting for the activation signal from Tehran.
And the text gives an incredibly modern, chilling example of how the physical and digital domains are merging.
Yeah, this part was wild.
It details a coordinated drone and cyber hybrid attack on a UAE data center.
That specifically disrupted Amazon Web Services, AWS, operations in Bahrain, and the UAE.
I want you to really think about what that means for a second.
Yeah.
You wake up, and it's not just the power grid in a war zone that's out.
Major cloud infrastructure. The literal backbone of modern digital life, global logistics, and commerce is completely paralyzed.
Because a data center a hemisphere away was targeted by a drone.
It perfectly illustrates how a regional conflict instantly metastasizes into global digital life.
If AWS goes down in a major commercial hub like the UAE,
Thousands of businesses, maritime logistics networks, and international financial transactions halt instantly.
the source warns of escalating ransomware attacks on U.S. municipal systems as Iran continues to swing back.
The cyber front respects zero physical borders.
And the sheer economic damage inflicted in cyberspace can easily rival the kinetic damage inflicted on the ground.
Absolutely.
And while they're fighting this global war in the cloud, they still have to hunt the physical weapons on the ground.
Right.
The text calls this hunting the arrows, the incredibly complex tactical war on mobile missiles.
We've talked about the coalition destroying the static air defenses.
But locating and destroying a highly mobile Iranian missile launcher before it can fire and hide is a totally different ballgame.
It is arguably the single most difficult tactical problem in modern aerospace warfare.
Iran knows it cannot compete in a traditional aircraft-to-aircraft dogfight.
So its entire offensive doctrine relies on a massive, highly dispersed, road-mobile arsenal of ballistic missiles.
To truly understand the scale of this challenge, the source draws a brilliant comparison to the 1991 Gulf War.
Back then, the U.S. and its coalition spent thousands of aircraft sorties over the Iraqi desert, desperately trying to hunt down Scud missile launchers.
They were largely unsuccessful.
The text notes they only had a 10 to 20% success rate.
And it often took hours to process the satellite intelligence, relay it to command, and get a bomber physically over the target coordinates.
By the time the jet arrived, the truck was gone.
But the text says the technology in 2026 has completely upended that equation.
The timeline from sensing a target to shooting a target, the kill chain, has shrunk from hours down to just 10 to 30 minutes.
And minutes.
The evolution is staggering. The source details an AI-driven fusion of intelligence that borders on science fiction.
We're talking about massive streams of data pouring in simultaneously from Keyhole series spy satellites in low Earth orbit,
High-altitude RQ-4 Global Hawk surveillance drones,
forward-based naval radars,
and signals intelligence intercepting encrypted Iranian comms.
the exact second a ballistic missile engine ignites in the desert, an infrared sensor detects the massive heat bloom.
That raw data is instantly fed into an AI algorithm that calculates the trajectory
Geolocates the exact position of the launcher.
and automatically tasks the nearest available asset, whether that's a loitering suicide drone or an F-35, to strike the vehicle before the crew can pack it up and drive into a tunnel.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Despite this incredible AI-driven 10-minute kill chain, and despite the source claiming the coalition has destroyed up to 50% of the mobile launchers,
Iran still manages to get missiles through.
yes, they are still actively hitting targets in Israel and the Gulf states.
It proves the absolute limits of even the most technologically supreme air campaign in human history.
It does.
A 50% attrition rate is a miraculous military achievement compared to 1991.
But when the enemy starts with a deeply hidden arsenal of thousands upon thousands of missiles,
That remaining 50% is still a massive, deadly strategic threat.
Iran's road mobile networks are vast.
They use highly sophisticated decoys.
And they utilize saturation tactics, firing dozens of missiles simultaneously to overwhelm the AI sorting systems and deplete interceptor stockpiles.
And then there's the problem of the missile cities.
Right. The source describes these as massive underground complexes excavated straight into the bedrock of mountains.
Plunging up to 500 meters deep.
How do you even begin to attack a military installation buried beneath half a kilometer of solid rock?
The short answer is you can't reach the bottom of it.
Even with the absolute largest conventional weapons in existence.
The text mentions the U.S. deploying B-2 stealth bombers armed with the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators.
These are 30,000-pound precision-guided bunker buster bombs.
They are engineering marvels that can penetrate up to 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating.
But they simply cannot reach 500 meters down.
So the tactical shift described in the source is fascinating.
Instead of trying to destroy the centrifuges or the missiles deep inside the complex, the bombers target the infrastructure around it.
Specifically, the entrances, the mouths of the caves.
They use these massive bombs to literally collapse the mountainside over the entrance tunnels.
Effectively sealing them shut.
As the text vividly puts it, they turn these multi-billion-dollar subterranean fortresses into graves for the equipment and the personnel trapped inside.
It's a staggering image.
Actively collapsing mountains to bury missile silos alive.
Yeah.
But stepping back from the tactical strikes, it raises the ultimate question of what the endgame of all this destruction actually is.
The source breaks down the overarching doctrines of both sides into short, medium, and long-term goals.
Let's look at the U.S. and Israel's playbook first.
The coalition's strategy is fundamentally a multi-phase dominance campaign.
In the short term, their goal was to achieve total air superiority and decapitate the political and military leadership.
Which, as we've seen, they largely accomplished in the first 48 hours.
Moving into the medium term, the objective shifts to attrition, systematically bleeding Iran's missile stocks dry.
And aggressively isolating their proxy networks like Hezbollah in Lebanon or the Houthis in Yemen.
Physically preventing them from resupplying or coordinating a unified front.
And what does this source identify as the ultimate long-term goal?
The long-term objective, as stated explicitly by figures cited in the text like former President Trump, is to induce outright regime change in Tehran.
But the critical distinction here is the method.
They aren't planning a massive D-Day-style ground invasion.
The strategy is to create a profound leadership vacuum at the top.
And applies such overwhelming, relentless military and economic pressure that internal grassroots uprisings tear the regime apart from the inside.
And Iran's strategy is almost the exact inverse of that.
It's a strategy of asymmetric attrition.
In the short term, their goal is to launch massive missile salvos to overwhelm coalition air defenses.
And, crucially, to physically close the Strait of Hormuz to instantly spike global oil prices.
In the medium term, they want to activate those global cyber networks we discussed and unleash their proxy militias to create maximum disruption across multiple theaters.
And long-term, their strategy is simply survival.
To absorb the sheer kinetic punishment in those subterranean bunkers.
Project an image of unyielding resilience to their domestic audience.
And simply outlast the political will and the economic tolerance of the U.S. coalition.
It is a brutal contest of endurance versus overwhelming technological force.
And this is where the source introduces a very compelling piece of strategic analysis.
There's an essay heavily referenced in the text titled Targeting the Archer.
The author of this essay argues that the coalition's current strategy of hunting down every single mobile missile launcher,
playing whack-a-mole with the arrows,
it's fundamentally flawed.
It's too slow, it's too costly, and it allows Iran to dictate the tempo of the war.
Right. The essay argues for a decisive, immediate shift in focus to decapitate the regime across 4 very specific layers of power.
Layer 1 was the supreme leader, Khamenei, who was eliminated on day 1.
Layer 2 encompasses the top IRGC commanders and the senior hardline clerics who provide the ideological framework for the regime.
Layer 3 targets the mid-level IRGC officers and regional intelligence chiefs.
The men who actually run the day-to-day military logistics.
And finally, Layer 4 is the Bassi militia.
The grassroots, neighborhood-level enforcers who are primarily responsible for crushing domestic dissent and protests on the streets.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
when you look closely at this 4-layer decapitation strategy, it bears a very striking, almost eerie resemblance to the de-Baathification playbook the U.S. used in Iraq back in 2003.
Where they systematically dismantled Saddam Hussein's entire societal power structure, from the absolute top down to the local party bosses.
But there is one massive, glaring difference in this scenario.
In 2003, the U.S. utilized hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground to physically occupy the country and enforce that systemic dismantling.
In this 2026 scenario, the source suggests the coalition is attempting to engineer the exact same total systemic collapse, relying almost entirely on standoff air power, cyber warfare, and economic strangulation.
Specifically to avoid the political nightmare of massive U.S. ground casualties.
Exactly.
I want to jump in here and just do a quick necessary reminder for you.
Right.
We are deeply exploring the source material strategic analysis of this four-layer regime change model.
We are unpacking the military logic of the essay presented in the blog to understand how these planners think.
We are absolutely not advocating for or endorsing this geopolitical strategy.
We are just looking at the blueprints currently laid out on the table.
Precisely. And the reason this specific strategy of rapid regime collapse is being debated so fiercely in the source text is because there is a massive ticking economic clock hanging over this entire conflict.
And that clock is ticking loudest in the Strait of Hormuz.
This is the critical choke point.
This is where a regional war in the Middle East violently reaches into the living room of every single person on Earth.
The source states that as of March 2, there is a de facto complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Commercial ship traffic is down an astonishing 70%.
70%. Global oil and gas supermajors have totally suspended shipments through the Gulf.
And major maritime insurers have completely pulled their war risk coverage, making it financially impossible for tankers to sail.
Brent crude oil immediately surged to nearly $80 a barrel.
With stark panic warnings from markets that it could easily break $100 or even $120 if the closure persists for more than a few weeks.
So what does this all mean?
To understand why the source explicitly calls this Iran's true strength, you have to look at the unforgiving reality of geography and global economics.
The Strait of Hormuz is a remarkably narrow, easily mined waterway connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean.
Through that tiny, fragile geographic bottleneck flows roughly 20% of all global oil consumption.
We're talking about 15 to 20 million barrels moving through there every single day.
Furthermore, 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, passes through it.
By laying naval mines in the strait, using swarms of fast attack boats,
Or simply threatening to sink massive, slow-moving tankers with cheap suicide drones.
Iran fundamentally does not need to defeat the U.S. Navy in a pitched, open water battle.
They simply need to make the financial and physical risk of transit too high for commercial shipping companies to bear,
It is the ultimate asymmetric tactic.
holding the entire global economy hostage to deter the coalition from launching further military strikes.
The source paints a terrifying, highly detailed picture of the cascading global effects if that choke point stays closed.
They categorize it as a generational energy shock.
The macroeconomic data projects a 0.5 to 1% rise in global inflation for every single $10 increase in the price of a barrel of oil.
If oil hits $100 or $120, we're looking at massive, runaway global inflation.
The text warns of severe stagflation and what it calls a guaranteed global recession.
Noting that tech and banking stocks are already plummeting across European and Asian markets.
The macroeconomic numbers are grim, but the microeconomic reality, the actual impact on human beings, is devastating.
The essay in the source points out the profound, often overlooked human cost of this asymmetric tactic.
It hits the global poor the absolute hardest.
Think about a factory worker in Indonesia or an overseas agricultural worker in the Philippines.
Suddenly, the cost of the fuel they need just to commute to work doubles overnight.
The cost of transporting basic food staples to their local markets skyrockets because global shipping rates have exploded.
Their local currency rapidly depreciates against the safety of the U.S. dollar.
Years of hard-fought economic progress and poverty reduction can be entirely wiped out in a matter of weeks, simply because a narrow waterway thousands of miles away is heavily mined.
The source notes a very specific metric that will hit close to home for many of you listening. U.S. gasoline prices instantly jumping over $3 a gallon on day one and climbing rapidly.
It's an immediate, visceral impact on daily life.
But the text also highlights a massive, tragic irony to this strategy.
Closing the strait is also completely devastating to Iran's own civilian population.
Iran's fragile economy is heavily reliant on the revenues from the 1.65 million barrels of oil it exports daily.
With 90% of that crude going directly to China.
By closing the strait, Iran is violently suffocating its own primary economic lifeline, while half of its population already lives below the poverty line.
It is an act of desperate, mutually assured economic destruction.
Iran is making a massive geopolitical bet.
They are betting that the global community, terrified of a massive recession and soaring inflation,
will exert overwhelming diplomatic pressure on the U.S. and Israel to halt the military campaign before Iran's own domestic economy completely implodes.
It is a high-stakes, incredibly dangerous game of economic chicken.
And that economic implosion leads us directly into the most fascinating and complex part of the source material.
Because if the economic pressure inside Iran becomes unbearable, while the military command structure is simultaneously being dismantled from the air,
You reach a societal breaking point.
The source provides a highly speculative, incredibly detailed, hypothetical scenario.
A 21-day total collapse of the Iranian regime.
They map out exactly how a modern nation-state unravels day by day between March 2 and March 23, 2026.
This raises an important question.
Before we delve into the mechanics of this collapse, we have to address the probability, which the source itself acknowledges right up front.
The author of the text admits that a rapid 3-week total collapse of a heavily entrenched state apparatus is historically improbable.
They put the odds at only 20 to 30%.
Authoritarian regimes possess remarkable, brutal resilience.
This entire 21-day scenario hinges on two massive fragile assumptions.
First, that there is absolute zero external intervention to prop up the regime.
Meaning geopolitical powers like Russia or China do not step in with emergency military logistics or massive economic bailouts.
And second, it requires the total catastrophic evaporation of Iran's vast internal security forces.
Let's walk through this hypothetical 21-day timeline because the mechanics of how a society actually fractures under this kind of pressure are fascinating.
Week 1, from March 2 to March 9, the source categorizes as the cracks phase.
The U.S. and Israel intentionally shift their strikes away from the border and intensify their bombing specifically on the internal IRGC and besieged command structures.
Over 1,500 additional sites are hit in a week.
The sheer physical destruction of the internal security apparatus is immense.
The text mentions the IRGC central headquarters in Tehran being repeatedly struck until it's reduced to rubble.
And massive besieged training facilities in provincial capitals like Tabriz and Shiraz being completely obliterated.
But the physical destruction is just the catalyst.
The real cracks are psychological and logistical.
With Supreme Leader Khamenei dead, the absolute ideological glue that binds the deeply religious Basij militia is suddenly gone.
Then, the cyber warfare compounds the kinetic damage.
The source hypothesizes Israeli hackers actively infiltrating the IRGC financial and payroll systems, completely freezing salaries.
Think about the psychology of a low-ranking, poorly equipped conscript in the Bull Sea.
Your bases are being actively bombed by stealth fighters you can't see.
Your supreme leader has been assassinated.
The national power grid is failing.
And now your paycheck just bounced.
The incentive to enforce regime mandates vanishes.
Desertions would naturally skyrocket.
And as those security forces melt away or abandon their posts, the public cautiously steps into the void.
The text notes that small, sporadic protests begin to form in highly symbolic locations, like Inqilab Square in Tehran.
The public quickly realizes the Basij weren't coming on motorcycles to beat them off the streets because the Basij are either dead, hiding, or haven't been paid in weeks.
Which brings us to the critical escalation in week 2, the paralysis phase.
The bombing campaign shifts to deeper infrastructure, but crucially, it begins targeting what the source calls dual-use facilities.
Specifically, mosques and community centers that the IRGC and Basij actively use as logistical rally points and weapons depots.
This is a highly controversial tactical shift, as it risks massive civilian casualties and severe international backlash.
But in the strict logic of this hypothetical scenario, it further degrades the regime's ability to safely organize and deploy its remaining loyalists.
And as the state's enforcement mechanism breaks down, the protests swell dramatically.
The text imagines 500,000 people marching from Azadi Tower to the Parliament building in Tehran.
In Mashhad, a deeply conservative city, 300,000 gather in defiance.
Women are removing their hijabs en masse in the streets.
And the critical, fatal turning point in week 2 is that the remaining security forces, suddenly realizing the sheer overwhelming scale of the crowds and their own total lack of centralized backup, simply stop fighting.
They stand by, or in some highly publicized cases, they actually fraternize with the demonstrators to save themselves from mob retaliation.
Once that psychological fear barrier is broken and the state's absolute monopoly on violence collapses in the streets, the cascade of revolution is almost impossible to stop.
This leads directly to week 3, the tipping point.
The U.S. and Israel intentionally dial back the kinetic bombing over the cities to avoid uniting the public against a foreign invader.
But they maintain a total cyber stranglehold on the government's communications.
The protests reach over 1 million people in Tehran alone.
The historic bazaars, the universities, the municipal government offices all go on an indefinite general strike.
The entire economic and bureaucratic engine of the country grinds to an absolute halt.
According to this rapid collapse hypothesis, the pressure becomes insurmountable.
On March 21st, President Pezeshkian officially resigns, citing the will of the people on state television.
By March 23, The last isolated IRGC holdouts surrender to the crowds,
The besieged militia dissolves entirely into the population.
and a transitional provisional council takes over the government.
The Islamic Republic, a power structure that has defined the region for nearly 50 years, falls in a matter of weeks.
I want you to really consider how incredibly fragile, massive, seemingly invincible power structures can actually be.
When the digital lifelines are severed, when the banking systems are hacked, and when overwhelming external military pressure shatters the illusion of state invincibility, a deeply entrenched government can unravel with astonishing, terrifying speed.
It is a profound, if highly optimistic, hypothetical from the source.
It assumes that decades of latent, simmering public discontent, deeply fueled by severe economic hardship, corruption, and social repression,
Much of which was highly visible to the world during the massive 2022 and 2025 protests mentioned in the text.
finally boils over at the exact moment the state's brutal enforcement apparatus is blinded, disorganized, and paralyzed by cutting-edge external warfare.
We have covered a truly staggering amount of ground today.
From unpacking the sheer computational terror of 10-minute AI kill chains actively hunting mobile missiles in the desert,
To the unprecedented, society-altering cyber blackouts plunging millions into darkness.
to the looming threat of $100 oil barrels and a guaranteed global recession currently hanging by a thread over the mine waters of the Strait of Hormuz.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final overarching thought to mull over as you process all of this data.
Consider the profound, almost absurd paradox of modern warfare that we've just uncovered in this source material.
On one hand, we are deploying the most cutting-edge, artificial intelligence-driven 30,000-pound stealth technology imaginable.
Machines capable of calculating hypersonic trajectories in milliseconds from data beamed from low Earth orbit.
We possess the power to instantly erase a nation's digital existence.
But on the other hand, the entire interconnected global economy is currently being brought to its absolute knees by the control of a narrow, ancient geographical waterway.
We are fighting 21st century cyber and aerospace wars in the cloud. But fundamentally, our global survival is still entirely captive to 19th century geography.
That is a brilliant, sobering point to end on. Thank you for joining us on this intense journey through the data, the timelines, and the profound strategic possibilities of this conflict. Stay curious, keep critically seeking out the facts, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.